Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Vivid Voltage, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using the code Omnipoke. Another week has flown by, which means we're going to be looking at tournament results from dates between the 5th and the 11th of December, which brings us one day behind as I'm recording this. So yeah, should give us a really good on-the-pulse information to go off of if you are joining in tournaments this weekend or going into the next week, as we're starting to see things shape up. I think last time we looked at this, we saw a real rise in Pikachu and Zekrom, so we'll see if there's any new decks coming into the space that are going to have a better time against that deck, and if there's any adaptations that the current best decks have been incorporating to keep up with the rise of Pikachu and Zekrom, which seems to be, you know, in terms of first place finishes, it's gone way beyond ADP at this point. I think ADP is just hanging on in there, holding on to that first place spot just based on pure number of placements, but it didn't break through to first place in any of these tournaments, I don't think, off the top of my head. So Pikachu and Zekrom seems to be public enemy number one, and that's shown again with Azul's November Twitch sub-tournament. Again, I'm doing the cutoff of 50 players, so this one just about gets in, and it's Pedro who was able to win the event with Pikachu and Zekrom. And this looks like a pretty streamlined build. He's playing 0 crushing hammers. He is just playing the just draw good, just feels good man Pikarom base build. Really cool to see that this is able to win tournaments without the need of crushing hammers. You essentially pad out your Bolton V count and you have higher air balloon switch outs, and you get to play a 4th speed lightning for just better consistency really, and a 4th Marnie even, which you could argue is also really important against some of the one prize archetypes in the game right now. So yeah, cool to see the just draw good build of Pikarom able to take the win in this admittedly smaller tournament, but still very valid data. ADP was coming in 2nd place, and it is maining the Aegislash, which may be becoming more important now, because I think there's been a couple of Decidueye placements this week. It's playing the Leon in there as well. Doubling up to 2 great catchers, I think, is a really smart move for ADP players right now, because you can try and pick up things that Bolton is powering up in the back. I think in general, Great Catch is just good in the meta right now, so really cool to see. No disruption here. You're not playing Swell and you're not playing Marnie, so you're really just trying to outrace people, I guess, is the one-trick pony of this kind of build. But it looks very reasonable, to be honest. Combo heavy, playing the Tool Scrapper and Leon for getting through the Luke Metals by the most part, or for the most part, I should say. And yeah, lots of gusting options. I think I prefer double Great Catcher for boss to the coin flip catcher builds right now, because there's just so many GXs that sit on the bench. Just the way the meta's going, that Great Catcher guaranteeing is just way better. There's a Luke Metal that was able to make top 4. And again, no crushing hammers. I'm starting to feel good about this week so far. Azul's subs are all cultured humans who don't need to use crushing hammers to win games. You'll love to see it. 14 energy, 4 of them being coatings, a lot of respect being given to the fire decks in the format. Only 1 tag call makes me kind of nervous. But yeah, looks decent otherwise. A/V again, a lot of respect being given to the Decidueye players. I think I had this conversation last week, but I'm still not certain if Aegislash is better than Stunfisk actually winning that matchup. Let me know if you guys have played that enough. I mean, Aegislash is like a surefire thing, but the Stunfisk is really good into some other matchups with skewing prize trades when you need to, so just a small anecdote there. We do have a Centiskorch, which has actually embraced the crushing hammers, also making top 4 by the looks of things. It's not the first time we've seen Centiskorch playing crushings, so it's not hugely surprising to see this. Playing the 1 Stellar Wish, just... Man, 1 Stellar Wish, 4 Scoop Up Net is such a weird split. Surely you'd play 2 Jirachi 3 Net would make more sense out the gate. Just so you're not starting with some of these other guys. Interesting. Yeah, a lot of space is being made for the crushings. Also playing Tool Scrapper. What tools are you afraid of as Centiskorch? What tools do you need to remove if you're Centiskorch? Is it just big charms from like Pikaroms and stuff like that? I don't know. Don't think the Tool Scrapper's that great. I definitely want to try and weave in a second Dedenne or a third Com. Those would be some of my first things on the bucket list to add. But yeah, Crushing Hammers. Where there's a will, there's a way. People will play Crushings and everything. We'll move on to the Sunday Open on the 6th, and this was a 158 player tournament. It was won by Blacephalon, and it's playing 17 energy. It's going back to playing a couple retrievals, and I like the include of Reshizard. I've said this a few times already as I talk through the Blacephalon. I even did a video on the channel yesterday talking about a more Reshizard-focused based Welder deck, which is just trying to Reshizard and cram as much as possible, expecting there to be a lot of swell and a lot of Marnie in the meta. So seeing the Reshizard come back in makes a lot of sense to me. For the most part, we're seeing ADPZ adding in Leon rather than Vitality Band, which makes the Reshizard in theory a lot safer because they're having to dig for a supporter card rather than having to dig for an item card and then being able to research and Dedenne and Crobat all in one turn to find it. So yeah, I still think Reshizard's very solid. Again, I think to make the most out of Reshizard, I still like putting in the Zigzagoon. I think it makes it just much more flexible. It makes Cramorant a stronger utility card as well. But yeah, this is something that I'm more happy to see than just the raw 19 energy cards, to be honest with you. And I think we actually see Kobe. He plays a lot of tournaments this week, all with Blacephalon, and I think he makes tweaks along the way. So we'll see how he adapts his own list as he goes, because he's had a lot of results this week, just from eyeballing it. Another ADPZ. This one is playing Crushings. It's also playing Zamazenta. It's got the one Great Catcher in here. I mean, I'm still not a big fan of Crushings, but this is your staple Crushing list, right? This is pretty straightforward of a Crushing-based list. So yeah, just something to go off of. Not too much to like question. I don't think there's any wasted spaces in here for for example, it's just whether you want to play the Crushings or not, or if you want to have extra outs to certain things, you know. If you want to play second Crobat, if you want to play third Marnie, if you want to play extra Spinner, those are the cards that go into the list as soon as you take out these Crushing Hammers. But, you know, fourth Zacian, those sorts of things, you know, they're not as obvious of win conditions as hitting heads on a Crushing Hammer can be. Eternatus making top 4. This looked to be a straight build of Eternatus. Absol's starting to sneak back into Eterna builds, and I think it's because the amount of Air Balloon in the format. I think there's so many Boltoned, well, Pikachu, Zekrom decks using Air Balloon in very high counts. You know, Pedro is playing 3 copies even, and in the previous winning deck list. So Absol denying that, also obviously very good against ADPZ as well, that want to put the one Zacians and stuff in the early turns. So Absol's making its way back into some of these lists, which makes a bit of sense. This is playing the Crushings and the Power Plants, looks pretty good to me. Power Plant still is fairly strong in the meta. It's a very good counter stadium to the welding decks. So yeah, seems pretty good. And Crushing's again a win condition. So yeah, I also like the 10 basic energy counts. I think so often I see 9 with Eternatus, and it makes me a little scared that we're gonna miss and just lose. Finally, there's a Centiskorch in the top 4. This one still playing your boy Talonflame. This one's got a much thicker Jirachi line than the previous one that we've seen. I'm starting to really get on board with a Great Catcher in the Centiskorch list as well. Again, just seeing so many GX Pokemon around the boards of so many decks right now makes a lot of sense. Not much energy recursion. Oh no, it's got the double crystal. Yeah, this is looking pretty decent. Pretty decent. The only card I don't like seeing is Talonflame. I'd like that to be a Cramorant or to be, yeah, just a different option in general. Third Volcanion, something like that. Those are the cards I kind of think about. Making the space for the double stamp is pretty normal. It normally sits between 1 and 2, which is pretty cool. We move on to E&D's Season 2 qualifier number 4. This is an 88-player tournament. It was won by Centiskorch. It kind of had a lull period in the previous video that I did of the week roundup, and now it's kind of coming back a little bit. This one's playing a couple copies of Heat Fire Energy to buff your hit points. I think with the amount of Eternatus still in the format, it makes a lot of sense. I think Eternatus is quite solidly, you know, alongside Blacephalon, those are the kind of 4th and 5th best decks in the format. So Heat Fire is reasonable for sure, to stay out of range of those guys, to make that matchup a little bit easier. For me, Victini V isn't the strongest option of the ones you could be playing as Fire Tech Pokemon. Again, there's the option for Heatran, just to have a huge GX attack, pivot turn. So yeah, I think that's normally a stronger one. This one is incorporating Cram, which I'm a fan of. It's playing 3 Boss's Orders. That's a pretty high count. I feel like Great Catcher as one of those slots makes a lot of sense. The one of Research, again, it's one of those things where I prefer it being a Bird Keeper, just because it's extra synergy for Stellar Wish in the first instance, but it's an Elder Gossable way of getting out of paralysis from a Choo-Choo, which is super, super integral in the game right now. They're going to stamp you low. They're going to try and paralyze you to make a big comeback, because normally they're sacrificing prizes in those opening turns just by the nature of how Centiskorch tries to play the game. So yeah, and I feel Boss isn't that effective against... Actually, you know what? There's Fion as well as an option. So there's Great Catcher and Fion that I would put in before the 3rd boss. Just my own personal preference for those. But it does take the win here, which is reasonable. Having access to Boss at the right time is still, you know, like a huge win condition. There's a Pikarom that came 2nd. This list is incorporating those spicy one-off supporters of Leon and Yellgrunt. Does let you do some pretty creative stuff, you know, tag bolting through Zacians, for example, with the Leon, pushing the Lightning Ride to 280. There's some great things you can do, and even just, you know, all the break points of damage that Boltund has, it can just squeak you in range at times. So yeah, there's a lot of good to be said about the Leon. I haven't actually used it myself because it's a one-off supporter and I'm still kind of skeptical of those, but I can see that there's such a good variety of attacks that can all take advantage of it. It makes sense for Leon to be in the deck. Otherwise, yeah, pretty reasonable stuff all around. 3 reset stamps is on the high side alongside the 4 money, so really just, you know, making sure that they have the disruption element available to them. Pretty big deal. ADP in top 4 is looking pretty reasonable as well. This is a no Crushing Hammer build. Reset Stamps worked its way back in, and Power Plant. Okay, there is some spice going on here. Power Planting Mewtwo's. I think I'd rather just kill a Mewtwo than Power Plant a Mewtwo, you know? I think I would sooner play like 1 Swell and 1 Vitality Band, like I was saying earlier. I think that's going to get you a lot more value. And the Reset Stamp, I mean, I've been over this. I'm not a huge fan of the Stamp in ADP, because people can sit with game on board against you if you just had those slower openings. So yeah, some creative cards here. Power Plant is annoying for decks, obviously, and it can stop the mirror having push potential, and it can stop the mirror captivating winking you, I guess, but I mean, and Plant Stamp is a combo against Blounds. Like, let's not forget that. It is a good Blound answer, but so is Swell, you know, so is Swell quite a lot. Yeah, I think I'd rather be aggro into the Mewtwo's and put Vitality Bands back in. I've said it a couple of times this and last week, but definitely seems right to me to be able to hit 270 again in the game. There's a Pika Hammers that also rounds out the top 4. This looks much more like the ones we've been seeing over and over again. Just the one Choo-Choo's kind of sketchy when you're playing 2 Mewtwo's, but otherwise seems pretty reasonable all around. So yeah, pretty good stuff there. We move on to, I think that rounds out the top 4. Yes, it does. We'll go on to Hegster Season 3, number 12, and this was a large tournament, 175 player event. Pikarom coming out on top. You know, it's establishing itself as one of the strongest decks in the format, no doubt. Probably the strongest deck in the format. And this is similar to Pedro's just draw good forehead type of build of Pikarom. It's doing the same thing. I think this might be the identical list that Pedro played. Actually, Pedro played a Vika Volt for a Swell. I think those are the things that are different. But yeah, it's a just draw good Pika and do Pika things to win the game. And it's a very solid approach. Our boy Bird Boy 2000 came back with Altaria Control. He's already had a result with this archetype from one of the previous weeks. And he's come back again and shown how good he is with an archetype like this. I don't think you see this on the ladder much. I think a lot of people don't have experience against this deck, which does work to his advantage, but ultimately he's found a package of cards that works well for him, and fair play. You know, there's a lot of win conditions in here. Altaria in itself is a win condition against a handful of matchups that just don't have the answers to you. There's the Pidgeot, which can force some things back into your opponent's deck, I think it is. I can't remember. There's Chrogonal Lock tactics going on. There's so many facets to this deck that'll always be a headache to play against. So yeah, cool to see that for sure. There's always boss trapping plays as well if your opponent overextends. So tons of pitfalls in the deck to capitalize on. And again, he's an extremely experienced controlling based player. We've got a Mad Party, which actually made top 4, that's playing 4 Pokeballs. Hello? What is going on? What is this? What is this? No. Optimal Mad Party is quad Pokeball. No, it can't be. It literally can't be. This is pretty wild. Not playing Oricorio either. Only 4 supporters for draw. There has to be better cards than Pokeballs, right? There literally has to be. Even Lookalike Bell is probably better than Pokeballs. I like the amount of Gust he has. Double Great Catcher, double Boss looks pretty pog. I feel 2 count of Great Catcher is really justifiable in the game at the moment. So that's cool to see, but Pokeball is wild. It truly is wild. We got an ADP, also making top 4. And this is a no hammer build. It's playing quad Dreamy Revelation. My goodness. I'm personally not a fan of this. I don't think it gives you enough value to be worthwhile. It makes your switches better, I guess. But it doesn't have enough push potential for me to think that 4 slots are worthwhile. I would always play a 4th Zacian before a 4th Dreamy Revelation anyway, because in your opening, being able to Intrepid is just much, much, much more value. I mean, it helps you push, it helps you stamp proof, but so does Oricorio GX. And so does Oranguru to an extent. I'm not a big fan of Dreamy Revelation. And for the most part, most other people aren't playing Dreamy Revelation. So I think it's more likely to be the correct way to play without it than with it. But there you go. We've still got 4 to go. Pikarom Fiesta in the finals for this tournament. The Crollo 3. And this is, again, you know, we're between about 58, 57 cards at this point with the Pikarom. You've got some flexible supporter use cards. You've got, if you want to play Vikavolt or not, if you want to just play the Feels Good Man Pikarom. Those are really the question marks for you. Very similar top 2 decks in the finals. There's also a Mewtwo-based build, which has been dropping off a little bit. I feel more people have just gone to straight Pikarom than having this toolbox of attackers. But the toolbox is still showing up and doing reasonably well. Very similar strategy, very similar prize map that you're trying to force the opponent on. Very similarly trying to Marnie and stamp people out of the game in situations whilst putting a big wall in the active for a turn. So yeah, tons of similarities between the two, but rather than having crushing hammers, you're trying to weave in some of these tech attacking Pokemon to be a bigger threat against people. Having a wall break is nice in the game. Having Horror House GX as a win condition against a ton of things. Sitting with game on board with Naganadel in your discard pile is really good against some decks trying to stamp you out of games. So there's a lot to like about the toolbox of attackers. It's just whether you prefer flipping heads to win a lot of games, or if you prefer having the flexibility of different attacks to be kind of more in your control. It's really up to you. We've got another Eterna Hammers in the top 4 here. So again, it's establishing itself, again using Absol. Maybe the same player, I'm not too sure, haven't been keeping track. But yeah, pretty good. And this was a 105 player tournament. So a ton of events around that 100 player mark this time around. 169 players in this one. The Atlas Collectibles Chill Series number 11. And it was won by Decidueye Snorlax. Azul's sub-tournament also had Robin Schultz playing a very similar archetype that's just using the Snorlax and the Decidueye. Playing double Shadowbox Mimi, I think it's important to play this card. Otherwise, the Mewtwo players can just wall break with their Greninja and stuff like that. So, yeah, pretty cool to see. It feels like people are just saying it's too clunky to try and build Desi with Obstagoon now, and they're saying that Decidueye is enough of a hard carry in the game, which makes a decent amount of sense. So just trying to have Sonya and capture energies for your early turns to get your army of Rowlet down, and just trying to say that Splitting Arrow with Deep Forest Camo is a good enough win condition. And it seemed to be for this tournament, and it makes sense. Pikachu and Zekrom doesn't have many good answers at all into Decidueye, so that's normally your bread and butter matchup. I think you're really good into most Eternatus. I mean, the Poison build isn't a worry anymore because of Aromatic Grass Energy. You just instantly win that matchup, and then the straight Eternatus are more often making space for Crushing Hammers, so they're only playing like a couple Hoopers or a couple Spiritombs, so you should be safe into that matchup quite a lot. What are your bad matchups? It's only really things like 3 or 4 copies of Volk in Centiskorch. More people lean towards the 3-2 count at the moment because there's so much Jirachi in the list, which is good for you. Aegislash in ADP is obviously still an issue, but we haven't seen, like, it's kind of, I wouldn't say really a coin flip. I'd say more people wouldn't be playing Aegislash than they actually are in the game right now. So that's boding well for you. It's only really like Blounds and Senti that you're kind of nervous into. You instantly win things like Colossal. Pretty good into Thingamajig as well. Luke Metal. Again, it's if they play Aegislash, and that's even rarer than ADP playing Aegislash. So yeah, well-placed deck in the meta. So yeah, good choice there. There's an Eternatus that got second. And you can see this list is a direct example of that. More people are just playing Hooper Yveltal. Yveltal's just here to retreat for free as well. It's never going to 1v1 Decidueye or even do much damage to it at all. And more people are committing to disruption cards. This one's not playing Crushing Hammer, but it's playing Quad Power Plant, which is pretty wild. Heavy Stamp and Marnie as well, so pretty cool to see, but it just proves how easy it could be for the Decidueye Lax builds to do well, so it makes a lot of sense. ADP coming in at top 4 here, not playing Aegislash, obviously. I'm only mentioning it now because we've seen the Decidueye win. But yeah, for me, I still probably wouldn't be playing Aegislash, but maybe with this Decidueye win, more people will take note of it, so it may be something that we have to put in just for next week and see how things go. But yeah, just the one Marnie in here. Really just trying to be as aggro as possible. I like the energy count. 9-3 feels pretty healthy to me. With 3 spinner, that's a lot of access to energies, which I'm a big fan of when there's so much crushing in the game right now. Yeah, this is looking solid. This is looking pretty solid. I still think there's good value in Leon as well, so yeah, pretty cool. We've got a Psychic-based build of Mewtwo as well, which is trying to use Energy Assist Rotom as well as just manual attaching through the game to use the likes of Gengar Mimi, Nightwatch, also Soglea Lunala. Mega Lopuff is actually pretty good in the format right now, right? I keep mentioning how good the Great Catchers are in the format, so for a similar merit, Lopuff can be pretty good. So that's interesting to see. This is playing Jesse James combo as well, and Crushings. A lot of disruption going on here. Lots and lots of disruption. Trying to Marnie Nightwatch Crushing Hammer people is just going to be pretty rude to come up against, so you know, probably not the most consistent deck in the format. Probably weak itself to a lot of Crushing Hammer, Energy Denial. There's a few weak things here, which is why we're not seeing it a huge amount. But, man, it's going to be a huge headache to play against an archetype like that. So you can see why it's done pretty well in this tournament, which is pretty cool to see. All right, 2 more events to go. We've got Luke Metal that was actually able to take a win here. Luke Metal's really gone down in play a lot from the opening stages of Vivid Voltage. But again, we're seeing a pretty straightforward build. This one is making the space for the Crushing Hammers, which means typically you just play the one tag call. 13 energy, looking pretty okay. Yeah, looking reasonable. Not much to be said here. Crushing's, yeah, they're just reasonable cards in the game. I have to stop getting angry at seeing Crushing Hammers because they're just so reasonable right now. There's a Greens Centiskorch coming back in. For me, there has to be way too much money and swell in the format for a deck like this to be super successful. It just makes me very nervous to play something like this because there's just so much going on. This is playing Hyper Potion and Full Heal, though, to have searchable means of getting around Choo Choo and just healing off a Centiskorch and rebuilding it, rather than having to make two, which is pretty interesting to see. A Mixed Herb still in the game. I can't remember if Mixed Herbs are still legal. You could think about playing those, though, right? Maybe it just takes up too many spaces, but Full Heal is a pretty wild include. I mean, I understand the logic behind it, but it's still pretty wild to see. Yeah, I'm still really sketchy on the amount of money in the format to make this kind of archetype do well, but the includes clearly respecting Pikarom have served that archetype well, which is nice. We've got a Pikarom Hammers, which is again making the spaces for Zama and Aegislash, so a ton of Pokemon coming in here. Got the Great Catcher as well. Again, all reasonable stuff. ADP is kind of streamlining as well and being very similar for the most part. So again, we see who's this? This is Kobe, who is again top 4ing with Blacephalon, and he's playing now 16 energy. So he's going downwards rather than upwards, which is pretty much my exact thinking behind Blacephalon and where I like to play it. And he's playing Zigzagoon. He made the change I wanted. This is incredible. Kobe, you genius. You absolute genius. You're building Blounds right. You love to see it. You love to see it. So the best placing Blacephalon has reduced his energy count, put back in Reshizard Zigzagoon. It's like I know a little thing or two about this game. Incredible. Great work, Kobe. You're a genius. All right. And then finally, the last tournament is the Hexter Series 3, which is 139 players, and it was won by Welder-based Mewtwo. Again, it kind of just less and less popular with the amount of Pika builds. But looks like Lopuff is making a bit of a comeback. I'm enjoying these reactions to the format. We're seeing more Great Catcher coming back in again in this list. We're seeing Mega Lopuff even coming in to some of these builds, which is a pretty nice answer to Pikarom. Remember when Lopuff first came out and lots of people thought Pikarom died back then? How wrong were we? But man, yeah, it's good in the format again for sure. This is just playing, no Jirachis, no nothing, just the Mewtwo's, the Dedenes, the Bats. It's got the fire stuff going on in the format. I still feel Reshizard is a crazy card in the game right now. So it's worth just trying to build towards Flare Strike and Double Blaze as well to an extent. So yeah, looking pretty reasonable in all the counts and stuff like that. Nothing too surprising there. Yeah, it looks good to me. Nice work. Then we've got Luke Metal coming in at 2nd place. This is playing the Stunfisk over the Aegislash. So again, there's a small back and forth there. I think the biggest upside to Stunfisk is when you're up against Baby Blounds, you can actually try and run them out of energy cards. If you just make them kill 2 Zacians, a Stunfisk, your Dolls, all that sort of stuff, and even weave in Full Metal Wall, like super late game, to run them out of energy cards. We're seeing Reset Stamps in this build rather than Crushing Hammers, which is pretty okay. I think typically you don't actually see Reset Stamp in Luke Metal. It's normally just Marnie spamming. But again, that familiar energy count that a lot of people have landed on. I enjoy seeing the 2nd tag call. It's just really important in a lot of matchups to early threaten the Full Metal Wall. So yeah, reasonable all around. We've got Eternatus coming in at top 4. So none of the Poison Eternatus builds. Have we mentioned Poison Eterna at all today? I think we've only been looking at Crushing Hammer builds or builds that are playing high Power Plant and Stamp. This might again be the same player because he's playing the quad Power Plant 2 Stamps. So yeah, a list that they've landed on and are happy to place well with. And it's our boy Kobe again. He's back for more. Is he playing the same build as he did the previous day? He is. He's playing the same 60 again. So, man, Kobe's on a mission, man. He's just out here flying the Blown flag. And I'm happy to see that it's a 16 energy build rather than a 19 energy build of Blowns. It's a small victory, and I will hold on to that victory for dear life for Blowns, because whenever I've played it, I've always thought the exact same. The Reshizard is super good right now, and you sometimes need to just develop early aggression rather than sit behind an Intrepid Sword against a deck that plays 4 mana and 2 to 3 stamps. So, yeah, it's cool to see that Blowns is, you know, coming back down to earth from some lists that have been rocking around recently. So, thank you, Kobe, for making me a lot happier to see your list than ones previously. Regardless, let's look at the updated table for this week. Placement-wise, still a ton of ADPZ, as you'd expect. A good amount of Pikachu and Zekrom as well. And then Blowns and Eternatus and Centiskorch all doing pretty well. Luke Metal actually had a big uptick from a couple of the previous weeks, I think. Like last week, there was only one Luke Metal. Well, at least an uptick from last week. So that's cool to see. Oops, I've gone too far on my dragging. Colossal kind of had a bit of a dip after its highlight reel from last week, where it won a tournament and then had a couple other placements. You can see 4 from last week. I think Decilax is the biggest thing to keep an eye on for the following weeks. I think if ever there's been a good time to put Aegislash in your ADP, it's probably now, because there's that small hint of Decilax being an archetype in the game. If you're playing Pikarom, I still don't think you commit to anything like Electros or anything like that. I'm not sure if that's going to carry you over the line, but it's something that we've seen previously when there are these annoying walling style archetypes. You could even just consider playing things like Vikavolt V to really slow them down and possibly have boss plays on their Rowlets and Dartrix before they even evolve. You could think about those sorts of players as well, if you want to have a soft counter to Decilax. But that seems like the biggest deck to me that makes sense to be having an uptick in play coming into the next week. Definitely makes a lot of sense why that's had some placements in the week. So yeah. And then we look at the total. So I've added on the rankings. I've kept the same CP thing as last time, where I just have it all as League Cup CP. So it's still not perfect, but it's still a decent indication. Pikarom now has overtaken Centiskorch in the number of placements it's had by just 1 additional placement. So now it's a silver medalist in both regards. It's starting to catch up on ADP. You can see why as well. Just a sheer number, you know, such a huge amount of first place finishes compared to any other deck. So it is going deep into all of these events. Blowns has had an uptick as well in going late on into tournaments as well, thanks to our boy Kobe. Other than that, ADP still very safe, very solid. Centiskorch still very safe and solid as well. Things to be aware of, this Decilax deck, you know, it starts with little bits of murmurings, but I feel like it's very reasonable going forward, and I think it kind of replaces Deci Goons right now. As Obstagoon doesn't really add any additional win condition that the Decidueye is already trying to provide for you, if that makes sense. And the hand advantage of Lax is just too integral. Other than that, there has been some murmurings of Colossal again because of its typing, and some people are adding in Shadowbox Mimikyu to Colossal now as well to help combat the Pikarom matchup. So those are still things to monitor. But again, not too many changes this week. It's cool to see Pikarom is having a few placements without crushings as well, so maybe there's hope for this format yet. Let me know what you guys think, and yeah, cheers. See you tomorrow.